She finished her coffee quickly and got up. "I must go now," she said. Nick stood up. "Too nice to," he began, but the girl suddenly took his face between her hands and kissed him on the mouth. Hotel now. What thought Nick was that all about? Music. The man with white hair watched Nick and waited. After 4 or 5 minutes Nick finished his coffee, took his books and his camera and left the cafe. His car was just outside the girls' hotel and he walked slowly along the street to it. The man with white hair waited a second, then quickly followed Nick from a window high up in the hotel. The girl looked down into the road. She saw Nick and the man with white hair. About 50 yards behind him, Nick got into his car, and the man with white hair walked quickly to a red car across the street. 5 seconds later Nick drove away in his blue car, and the red car began to follow him. When the girl saw this, she smiled, then went to put some things in her travel bag. Chapter 2: A Hand in the Back. That evening in his hotel room in Vancouver, Nick could not stop thinking about the girl in the Whistler Cafe. Why did she come and sit with him? She didn't know him, and that story about a party in Toronto wasn't true, and she was worried about something. But what in that kiss? It was nice, of course, but why did she do it? Maybe she liked my face, Nick thought, or my brown eyes. But I'm not going to see her again, so it doesn't matter. Forget it. He put some money in his pocket and went downstairs to the hotel restaurant, but there were no free tables. So he walked down to Gastown and found a restaurant there. After dinner he went for a walk. Vancouver was a friendly city, and Nick liked walking through Gastown and Chinatown, looking in the shops and watching the people. It was nearly dark now, and it was a busy time of the evening. There were a lot of cars and a lot of people. After a time Nick began to walk back to his hotel. He came to a busy street and waited with a small crowd of people to go across. A tall woman in a blue dress stood next to him. She turned and smiled at him. "It's the first warm evening of spring," she said. "It's nice to be out after the long cold winter." "Yeah," said Nick, "it's great." Suddenly there was a hand in his back and the hand pushed Nick into the road. Nick fell on his face in front of a big green car. People screamed, but the green car stopped only inches from Nick's head. The woman in the blue dress ran into the road and pulled Nick to his feet. "Are you okay? What happened?" she said. The driver of the green car shouted angrily at Nick, but Nick did not hear him. "Somebody pushed me," he said to the woman. "I didn't fall." "Somebody pushed me." "Pushed you?" said the woman. "Who?" "I didn't see anybody." Nick looked at the faces of the people near him, but he didn't know them. Then he saw a man's back. The man was tall and thin and had very short white hair. He walked quickly away down the street and did not look back. "Hey you!" Nick shouted. "Wait!" But the man did not stop, and he was soon lost in the crowds. "Did he push you?" asked the woman in the blue dress. I don't know," Nick said. "Do you know him?" she asked. "I don't know his name," Nick said, "but I know that short white hair." Now where did I see it before? The woman began to move away. I must get home, she said. Are you okay now? Yeah, I'm okay, Nick said, and thanks for your help. That's okay. The woman smiled. Be careful now. Back in his hotel, Nick sat on his bed and thought. It was an accident, nobody pushed me. It was an accident, nobody wants to kill me. And there are hundreds of men in Vancouver with white hair. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, but Nick couldn't sleep. He listened to the cars in the road and he looked at the night sky through his hotel room window. Then he sat at the table and tried to write some more of his book about mountains, but he couldn't think about his work. He got back into bed. There were 4 or 5 magazines in the hotel room. They were not very interesting, but Nick sat in bed and opened one and saw a photo of Mystery Girl. He looked at the picture very carefully, but yes, it was her, Jan, the girl from the Whistler Cafe. She was next to a man of about 50 or 55. And they were in the garden of a big expensive house. They smiled at the camera and they looked very happy. Canadian millionaire Howard Hudson and his daughter Meg, it said under the picture, at their home in Toronto. Meg Hudson, not Jan, not Mystery Girl. Meg Hudson, the daughter of a millionaire. Nick read it again. Why did she come and sit with me in the cafe at Whistler? He thought, millionaires' daughters don't sit with strangers in cafes and then give them a big kiss when they leave. Why did she do it? What did she want? He thought back to the cafe in Whistler and the girl next to him at the table. Then he remembered something. He remembered a man at a table near them. In the cafe, a tall thin man about 60 years old. A man with very short white hair. Nick didn't sleep much that night. Chapter 3. A Walk in the Park. The next day was Thursday. Nick stayed in his hotel room and rode about mountains all morning. Then he drove to Stanley Park in the afternoon. He sat and read a book for an hour. Then he went for a walk under the tall trees. There was nobody here. It was quiet and he could walk and think. He thought about Meg Hudson and about the man with white hair. Did he know Meg Hudson? Did she know him? He remembered Meg Hudson's last words, drive carefully, Mr. Hollywood. Why did she say that? Why did she call him Mr. Hollywood? He didn't understand any of it. Suddenly he heard a noise. He stopped. That was a gun, he thought. There's somebody in the trees with a gun. There it is again. Then something hit the tree over his head. Somebody's shooting at me, Nick thought. He turned and ran, and somebody began to run after him. Nick ran through the trees. There was no sun in here. And it was half dark and there were no people. Nobody to help him. I must get to my car, Nick thought. Find some people, the police. He ran on. He could still hear the gunman behind him, so he ran faster. After 3 or 4 minutes, he stopped and listened. Nothing. It was all quiet. Nick was afraid. What's happening, he thought. Why is somebody shooting at me? First a hand pushes me in front of a car and now somebody shooting at me. He waited another second or two, then walked quickly back to his car. He was very careful. He looked and listened all the time. But nobody came out of the trees and nobody shot at him. Then he saw people, women with young children. Some boys with a football, 2 men with a dog. He began to feel better. Nobody can shoot me now, he thought. Not with all these people here. 10 minutes later he was back at his car. There was a letter on the window. Nick read it. It said, "I'm going to kill you, Mr. Hollywood." Nick drove to the nearest police station. He waited for half an hour. Then a tired young policeman took him into a small room. Nick told his story and the policeman wrote it all down. "So what are you going to do?" asked Nick. "Nothing," said the policeman.